There is a grain that refuses every law of modern agriculture. It thrives where fertilizers fail. It grows in drought, in salt, in soils declared dead. And when harvested, it leaves the earth richer than it found it. For 10,000 years, it fed empires that rose and fell on its back. Then it vanished. Not because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked too well. A crop that flourishes without chemicals, that regenerates soil instead of draining it, that grows where nothing else survives, cannot generate profit. And what generates no profit gets buried. This is the story of the seed that built civilizations, survived genocides, and still waits in forgotten corners for the day industrial systems collapse. Before we crack this vault open, if these stories pull at something inside you, the simplest way to keep them alive is this: subscribe, hit that bell, and share this with someone who needs to know what they hid from us. The archive opens in the highlands of the Andes, 15,000 feet above sea level. The year is 3000 BCE. A civilization rises where nothing should survive. Freezing nights drop to -20 Celsius. Scorching days hit 30 degrees. The air holds half the oxygen of sea level. Soil so poor agronomists would call it worthless. Mineral depleted. Eroded by 10,000 years of wind. Yet the Tiwanaku people build an empire. Stone temples weighing 40 tons carved from mountains 5 miles away. Advanced hydraulics channeling water through raised field systems that modern engineers still cannot fully explain. A population of 40,000 sustained in conditions that should starve them. The secret grows in terraced fields carved into mountain sides. Tiny seeds, golden, red, black, white. Each one smaller than a sesame seed. They call it Chisaya mama, mother grain. We call it quinoa. Chenopodium quinoa, not a true grain at all. It is a pseudo-cereal related to spinach and beets. But it behaves like grain, high protein, complete amino acids. And it grows where wheat dies, where corn refuses, where rice cannot even sprout. The Inca inherited it centuries later. They called it the gold of the Incas. Every spring, the emperor himself planted the first seeds using a golden spade. Priests blessed the fields, soldiers guarded the harvest. But this was not ceremony for show. The Inca understood something modern agriculture forgot. The first planting sets intention. It declares priorities. When the highest authority in an empire gets on his knees to push seeds into dirt, everyone knows. Food is not a commodity, it is foundation. It fed armies that conquered 2,000 miles of coastline. It sustained messengers running 150 miles without rest through mountain passes where the air itself fights your lungs. Quinoa was not just food, it was fuel, it was power. It was why a civilization without wheels, without iron, without horses could build an empire stretching from modern Colombia to Chile. 1 cup of cooked quinoa delivers 8 grams of complete protein, all 9 essential amino acids, lysine for tissue repair, methionine for detoxification, tryptophan for serotonin production. It contains more magnesium than almonds, more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk, vitamin E, B vitamins flooding every cell, folate that builds blood, phosphorus strengthening bones, and the glycemic index sits at 53. It does not spike blood sugar. It releases energy slowly, steadily for hours. Athletes today pay premium prices for engineered endurance foods, trying to replicate what quinoa does naturally. Gels, powders, bars packed with synthetic compounds. Meanwhile, Inca runners crossed the empire in relay systems called chasqui, carrying messages faster than horses could manage the terrain. Their fuel? Quinoa mixed with dried meat. Water, nothing else. They ran until their lungs burned, then ran further. Andean mothers fed it to infants. Warriors ate it before battle. Elderly people consumed it to extend life. The plant itself is a miracle of adaptation. It tolerates frost down to -8 degrees Celsius. Most crops die at zero. It survives drought that kills everything else. Some varieties can complete their entire growth cycle on rainfall equivalent to what a wheat field needs in 2 weeks. It grows in soils with pH from 4.8 to 9.5, acidic dirt, alkaline dirt, salty coastal plains, rocky mountain slopes. The roots plunge deep, pulling nutrients from layers wheat cannot reach. Root systems extend 4 feet down in loose soil, fracturing hardpan, creating channels for water and air. And when the plant dies, it returns those nutrients to topsoil. Quinoa does not deplete, it regenerates. Every harvest leaves soil better than before, richer in nitrogen, more porous, more alive. Then 1532 arrived. Francisco Pizarro lands in Peru with 168 men. He faces an empire of 10 million, an empire with storehouses so full they could feed every citizen for 7 years without planting a single seed, an empire where starvation was a word without meaning. Within a year, the Inca fall, not just through swords and guns, but through systematic cultural extermination. Spanish conquistadors understood power in ways modern corporations would later perfect. Control the food, control the people. They burned quinoa fields. They declared it pagan, unfit for Christians. They forced conversion to wheat and barley, European crops that require European methods. Fertilizers, plows, dependence. Priests told indigenous people that quinoa was devil food. Eating it meant damnation. The grain that sustained millions for millennia became contraband overnight. The Spanish did not just want the land, they wanted submission, and nothing creates submission like hunger. When you control what people eat, you control whether they eat. Wheat required tools indigenous people did not have. It needed plows, draft animals, grinding mills. It demanded flat land, consistent water, specific soil conditions. In the high Andes, wheat failed constantly, which meant indigenous people had to trade labor for food, had to work Spanish estates, had to mine silver to buy bread. The cycle was perfect. Destroy the food that grows itself. Replace it with food that requires infrastructure you control. Create artificial scarcity in a land that knew abundance. Families hid seeds in walls, buried them in courtyards, smuggled them to remote villages where Spanish soldiers rarely ventured. In the highest altitudes where wheat failed completely, quinoa survived. The people who refused conversion, who retreated into mountains, into jungles, kept planting. They risked execution to preserve seeds because they understood what conquerors feared. A people who can feed themselves cannot be enslaved. Every hidden cache of quinoa was a declaration. We will not starve. We will not beg. We will not forget who we are. For 400 years, quinoa remained hidden. The rest of the world forgot it existed. In Bolivia, in Peru, in Ecuador, indigenous farmers still planted. They traded seeds at local markets. They fed their children. But colonial systems had done their work. Quinoa was poor people's food, shameful, backward, a symbol of everything modernity promised to erase. Urban families wanted white bread, refined rice, products that signaled modernity, progress, escape from indigenous identity. To eat quinoa in the city was to admit you were still Indian, still tied to mountains, still outside the promise of European civilization. By 1980, quinoa production had collapsed. Andean youth left villages for cities. Old farming knowledge died with grandparents. The grain that built empires was nearly extinct. Then something unexpected happened. In 1982, 2 researchers from the University of Colorado traveled to Bolivia, Dwayne Johnson and Stephen Gorad. They were not looking for profit. They were documenting biodiversity before it vanished. They collected quinoa seeds from village to village. Farmers gave them freely, dozens of varieties, each adapted to specific microclimates. Red quinoa from lake shores that tolerated wind and salt spray, black quinoa from high plateaus that survived late frosts. White quinoa from valleys that produced the highest yields, pearl quinoa, rainbow quinoa, royal quinoa with seeds twice the normal size. Each variety represented generations of selection. Farmers watching which plants survived drought, which produced the sweetest seeds, which resisted birds. Knowledge encoded in genes. The researchers brought seeds back to Colorado. They planted test plots at 7,000 feet elevation. The results shocked everyone. Quinoa thrived. In mountain soil considered marginal, it outperformed expectations. High yields, no fertilizer, minimal water. The plant seemed designed for climates wheat struggled in. Because it was. 15,000 feet of elevation is not a challenge to overcome. For quinoa, it is home. Word spread. By 1983, a small company in Boulder started importing quinoa from Bolivia, Quinoa Corporation. They paid farmers double the local price. Bolivian growers could not believe it. Americans wanted quinoa, the grain they had been taught to despise, the food their children refused to eat because classmates mocked them. Production expanded. Villages replanted fields abandoned for decades. Elders taught young people how to terrace slopes, how to select seeds, how to thresh by hand using the same techniques their ancestors perfected 3,000 years ago. Within 5 years, quinoa went from obscurity to health food stores across North America. Vegans discovered complete plant protein. Athletes found endurance fuel. Celiacs celebrated gluten-free grain. Nutritionists started calling it a superfood, a word that would later become both blessing and curse. By 2000, quinoa was in Whole Foods, in cookbooks, in celebrity diets. Gwyneth Paltrow mentioned it. Oprah featured it. Every lifestyle magazine ran features. The perfect grain, the ancient secret, the Incan miracle. Articles rarely mentioned the people who kept it alive, who risked everything to preserve seeds when the world wanted them to disappear. Prices soared. Bolivian farmers who earned $200 annually suddenly made $2,000. It should have been a triumph. Finally, justice. Finally, recognition. Finally, the market rewarding what industrial agriculture tried to bury. But something broke. As quinoa became expensive abroad, it became unaffordable at home. Bolivian families who had eaten it for generations could no longer buy it. A kilo of quinoa cost more than a kilo of chicken. Farmers sold every seed for export and fed their children rice and pasta. Cheap calories, empty nutrition. Malnutrition rates climbed. The grain that evolved to nourish Andean children now flew to California and London, while those children went hungry. Irony so sharp, it drew blood. By 2013, the United Nations declared it the International Year of Quinoa. They called it a solution to world hunger, a superfood for the future. FAO delegates gave speeches in Geneva about indigenous knowledge and sustainable agriculture. They flew to La Paz for photo opportunities with Bolivian farmers. Then they flew home. The price hit $8 per kilogram. Bolivian consumption dropped 40%. Indigenous communities protested. This was cultural theft. The grain their ancestors died to protect was being stolen again, not by conquistadors this time, but by market forces, by a global food system that turns everything it touches into commodity. The very success they dreamed of became the mechanism of dispossession. But the story gets stranger. As demand exploded, scientists started asking the question companies did not want answered. Why does quinoa thrive in terrible soil? What makes it so resilient? Research teams from universities in Denmark, from labs in the Netherlands, from agronomists in Chile began studying the plant at molecular levels. What they found should have revolutionized agriculture. It did not. Quinoa roots host unique bacteria, symbiotic microbes that fix nitrogen from air, that break down rock minerals, that create nutrient pathways in soil wheat cannot access. The plant essentially fertilizes itself. It produces compounds called saponins on the seed coat. These are bitter, soapy, toxic to insects and birds. Traditional growers wash them off before cooking. But saponins do something else. They alter soil chemistry. They make nutrients bioavailable. They suppress weeds. They protect against fungal diseases. Natural pesticides produced by the plant itself, targeting threats while protecting beneficial organisms. A 2015 study in the journal Soil Biology and Biochemistry tested quinoa in degraded farmland, land destroyed by decades of synthetic fertilizers and monoculture corn. Soil so depleted earthworms would not live in it. After one season of quinoa, soil organic matter increased by 18%. Microbial diversity doubled. Nitrogen levels rose without a single gram of added fertilizer. The researchers wrote, "Quinoa acts as a biological plow, restructuring soil health in ways synthetic inputs cannot replicate." The findings were published, cited in 73 academic papers. Then silence. No major agricultural companies funded follow-up studies. No government agencies launched initiatives. No fertilizer manufacturers expressed interest, because the implications were devastating to their business model. If quinoa rebuilds soil, farmers do not need fertilizers. If it thrives without chemicals, they do not need pesticides. If it grows in marginal lands, they do not need expensive irrigation. The global fertilizer industry generates $230 billion annually. It depends on crops that deplete soil, that require constant chemical inputs, that lock farmers into perpetual purchases. Quinoa breaks that cycle. It offers exit, liberation, independence, and independence cannot be monetized. It can only be feared. In 2009, a researcher named Dr. Luz Gomez at the International Potato Center in Peru published findings on quinoa's salt tolerance. She grew it in soils with salinity levels that killed barley and wheat within weeks. Quinoa not only survived, it thrived. The plant's leaves excrete excess salt through specialized glands. Tiny crystalline deposits form on the surface, then blow away in wind or wash off in rain. The roots filter saline water, pulling fresh moisture while leaving salt behind. After 3 growing seasons, soil salinity dropped by 32%. The quinoa was healing soil poisoned by centuries of irrigation and chemical farming. Doing naturally what engineers spend billions trying to engineer, she wrote a proposal. Introduce quinoa to coastal regions being destroyed by rising seas, to farmlands in India and Pakistan poisoned by over-irrigation, to Australian outback where nothing grows. Restore degraded lands using a crop that heals while it feeds. The proposal circulated through agricultural ministries. It received enthusiastic verbal support. Officials called it innovative, promising, worth exploring. Then funding requests were denied, repeatedly. For 15 years. Dr. Gomez retired in 2021 without seeing a single large-scale implementation. She gave interviews near the end. Quiet, measured. She said the science was never the problem. The science was solid. The problem was political. A crop that solves problems without creating new markets has no constituency. But small farmers did not wait for permission. In Kenya, in Eritrea, in the Himalayas, growers experimenting with quinoa found the same results Inca farmers knew 3,000 years ago. It just works. A 2017 trial in Rajasthan, India, grew quinoa in desert conditions. 110-degree heat, minimal rainfall, sandy soil with almost no organic matter. The plants produced 1,200 kilograms per hectare. Not a record yield, but decent. And they used 1/5 the water required for rice. Farmers who participated said they spent nothing on fertilizer, nothing on pesticides, nothing but seed and labor. The profit margin was 3 times higher than wheat. News spread through farming communities, not through official channels. Through cousins who visited, through market conversations, through the underground networks farmers build when institutions fail them. But Indian agricultural universities did not promote it. Government extension services did not distribute seeds. When farmers asked why, officials said quinoa was not a traditional Indian crop, not suitable for subsidy programs designed around rice and wheat. The real reason was unspoken. India's fertilizer subsidies cost $14 billion per year. They keep global chemical companies profitable. Those companies fund research departments, sponsor conferences, employ the experts who advise government policy. A crop that does not need fertilizer threatens that entire structure, threatens jobs, threatens budgets, threatens the experts whose expertise depends on problems remaining unsolved. The resistance was not unique to India. In 2011, researchers at Washington State University tested quinoa across the American West. They planted it in Montana, in Idaho, in eastern Washington. Regions with short growing seasons, cold springs, drought summers. Quinoa outperformed wheat in yield per acre. It required 60% less water. It needed no nitrogen fertilizer. The lead researcher, Dr. Kevin Murphy, published results in Agronomy Journal. He wrote, "Quinoa represents a viable alternative for dryland farmers facing water scarcity and input costs." His university received calls. Farmers wanted seeds, wanted workshops, wanted to transition fields. Then funding disappeared. The quinoa research program lost its grants. Dr. Murphy moved to other projects. When asked years later, he said quietly, "There was no appetite for promoting a crop that undermines input sales." Agricultural research in the United States is funded largely by companies that sell seeds, chemicals, equipment. They fund studies that support their products. Quinoa needed nothing they sold. So research stopped, but the plant kept growing. By 2018, quinoa was cultivated in over 70 countries. Most production remained in Bolivia and Peru, but test plots appeared everywhere. In France, in Morocco, in Australia, in Canada. Farmers planting small fields, watching it thrive, harvesting seeds. The knowledge spread underground, peer-to-peer, outside official channels. Forums online where growers traded advice, seeds mailed in envelopes. YouTube videos filmed in fields, no narration, just farmers showing what works. In Ethiopia, farmers in the highlands received quinoa seeds from an NGO in 2014. They planted without expectation. Just another experiment from outsiders who thought they knew better. The first harvest astonished them. The grain grew faster than teff, their traditional staple. It tolerated erratic rains, and when cooked, children loved it. Within 3 years, quinoa cultivation expanded to 12 villages. Families who struggled with food insecurity had surplus. They sold excess at markets. Malnutrition rates dropped. Children grew taller. Women reported more energy. The grain was working. Then the government intervened. Officials said quinoa was not an approved crop for the region. They offered free fertilizer and hybrid seeds if farmers switched to maize. Most refused. They had seen quinoa work. But without government support, they could not access loans, could not get crop insurance, could not sell to official distribution networks. They kept growing it anyway, quietly, for themselves. Because sovereignty tastes like food, you grow without permission. Meanwhile, in corporate labs, a different story unfolded. By 2020, biotech companies filed patents on quinoa genetics. They claimed to have engineered improved varieties, higher yield, faster maturity, disease resistance. The patents covered genetic markers, breeding techniques, even traditional varieties collected decades earlier. Farmers who had saved seeds for generations suddenly faced legal threats. Companies argued that any quinoa containing patented genes belonged to them. Never mind that those genes existed for millennia. Never mind that indigenous farmers developed them through selection more sophisticated than anything labs achieved. The law recognized only what could be documented in patents, in academic papers, in formats indigenous knowledge never used. It was enclosure. The same process that stole communal lands in Europe 500 years ago. Take what is shared, claim ownership, charge rent. Indigenous communities in Bolivia and Peru protested. They argued quinoa was collective heritage, developed over millennia by countless hands. No corporation could own it. The legal battles continue, lawyers in air-conditioned offices arguing over seeds that grew before their legal systems existed. But the pattern is clear. When a crop proves too successful outside corporate control, the system tries to capture it. If it cannot suppress quinoa, it will try to own it. The deeper threat remains hidden. Quinoa is not just a crop. It is proof that industrial agriculture's core claims are false. We are told feeding the world requires synthetic fertilizers. Quinoa says no. We are told high yields need chemical pesticides. Quinoa disagrees. We are told marginal lands are useless without expensive inputs. Quinoa thrives there naturally. We are told modern breeding creates superior crops. Quinoa, developed by illiterate farmers over 10,000 years, outperforms engineered varieties in stress conditions. Every field of quinoa growing without chemicals is evidence that the system we built is not inevitable, not necessary, not optimal. It is simply profitable for a few. The agrochemical industry depends on dependency. Crops that require annual seed purchases. Fertilizers that deplete soil so next year's crop needs more. Pesticides that kill beneficial insects, creating pest explosions that require more pesticides. It is a closed loop of extraction. Quinoa breaks the loop. Plant it once, save seeds, replant forever. Let the soil recover. Watch yields stay strong year after year. That model cannot be monetized, so it gets marginalized. But history has a long memory. The Inca Empire collapsed. Spanish conquistadors died. Colonial powers crumbled. Quinoa survived. It survived because seeds are patient. They wait in soil, in walls, in jars, in the hands of grandmothers who refuse to forget. Through 4 centuries of suppression, indigenous farmers kept planting. Not for profit, not for markets, for survival, for identity, for the knowledge that freedom grows from the ground. Today, climate change accelerates. Droughts intensify, soils degrade. The crops feeding 8 billion people are fragile, bred for stability that no longer exists. Wheat fails when heat spikes above 35 degrees Celsius. Corn dies without consistent rain. Rice paddies sink as aquifers drain. The system is breaking, and when it breaks, what remains? The crops that never needed the system, the seeds that survived conquest, survived modernization, survived erasure. Quinoa is not a superfood trend. It is a life raft. But assumptions are not facts, and forgetting is not permanent. Quinoa teaches through persistence. It grows where it is not wanted. It thrives where it is not supposed to. It feeds people who refuse to beg. And every seed saved is an act of resistance, not loud, not visible, but permanent. You cannot unbuild a crop that grows itself. You cannot erase knowledge held in 10,000 hands. The fertilizer industry will not promote quinoa. The seed companies will not celebrate it. The systems built on dependency will not advertise liberation. But the seeds do not care. They grow anyway, in poor soil, in drought, in cold, in the hands of anyone willing to plant. If this vault cracked something open inside you, subscribe and hit that bell. Every like, every share keeps this knowledge alive. The next vault opens soon, and it will reveal what they hoped you would never find.